Okay. This is the topic. The topic is Trump and the special prosecutor. And I am Robert Whaley, retired professor of history at Ohio University, and we'll talk about FBI Director James Comey and the Congressional Intelligence Committee with Dave DeWitt, who is a journalist and editor of the Athens News, and we will have an interesting dialogue about this debatable subject. So today is the 16th of May, 2017. It's Athens Speakout 404, and it also happens to be, as a matter of accident, my birthday. I was born on the 16th of May, 1930, in the depths of the Great Depression.
And I just want to wish a very happy birthday to you, Professor, and it's great to be here with
Thank
you.
you.
There's some
Thank you.
applause
Thank
back
you.
there.
All right.
Some applause.
All right, we even have a far distant friend here. Anyway, the Attorney General's office may move to appoint a new special prosecutor in light of Donald Trump's firing of the FBI Director James Comey. This debate proves a theme of my many shows, which is called Debate is the Oxygen of Democracy. That topic is now coming to the forefront. Robert Whaley inserts a new article from the FBI reopens Clinton's investigation. And this article was written by Cameron Sawyer, an American who has been working in Russia. Cameron Sawyer wrote his article on the 29th of October 2016 when James Comey was investigating Hillary Clinton at the end of the last presidential election. Cameron Sawyer is a member of an academic newsletter called World Association for International Studies, edited at Adrian College, Adrian, Michigan. And most of the members of this private forum are graduates of Stanford University. Robert Whaley has been a longtime peace advocate and has had an opportunity to review a book for the Weiss Forum, W-A-I-S is an abbreviation, Weiss Forum, about the Soviet Union after the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991. I wrote that review analyzing a book on Soviet intervention during the Spanish Civil War, 1936, July 1936, to the 31st of March, 1939. At that point, I became a member of the Weiss Forum. The Weiss Forum has been at that time edited by Ronald Hilton, professor of Spanish and Latin American Studies at Stanford University. I believe that Ronald Hilton died about 1999, and one of his students studying the Spanish language took over the editorship of the Weiss Forum. Cameron Sawyer is an American expert who lived in the old Soviet Union and is still living there in the Federal Republic of Russia. Cameron Sawyer married a Russian woman, and he has got a degree from Stanford University from Ronald Hilton. He then began to work in Siberia, Cameron Sawyer began to work in Siberia for American oil companies, prospecting for new supplies of oil that Russia could export through Vladivostok and sell on the world market for dollars. On October 29th, 2016, James Comey, the director of the FBI, announced that they were reopening a criminal case against Hillary Clinton. Comey had closed the case against Hillary in the previous summer, 2016. Director James Comey claimed that he had new evidence about Russian penetration through Hillary Clinton's disorganized files. This new news came just 11 days before the presidential election and seemed to have been a new October surprise. Comey may have been trying to tilt the outcome of the November election against Hillary Clinton and for Donald Trump. Comey's motives are now under suspicion by the acting Attorney General and both parties in the United States Senate. In October, Cameron Sawyer wrote, quote, "During the summer, the FBI abruptly dropped the case. The so-called evidences that the FBI had was debatable. Cameron Sawyer then claimed that it was Hillary Clinton who put James Comey and the FBI into the presidential campaign. Sawyer is a big business conservative. Both Clintons have been investigated by the FBI for decades. Sawyer claimed that the investigations go back for decades to the very beginning of Hillary's political career. Back in the 1960s, Bill and Hillary Clinton ran the state of Arkansas like a banana republic. Sawyer changes his mind and now admits, in October of 1916, that Donald Trump is a repulsive character, utterly unqualified and utterly unsuited for the office of the President of the United States. According to Robert Whaley, the issue now is for the great majority in Congress and the Attorney General's office to decide to investigate FBI and James Comey. Should Congress appoint a special prosecutor? This came up to a majority of a bipartisan joint resolution in Congress and the Congressional Intelligence Committee. The news now reminds everybody of Richard Nixon and his last days in the White House, when he was firing practically everybody in the White House in 1973. At that time, Congress and the mass media, led by the New York Times and the Washington Post, were investigating Richard Nixon. In addition, the Democratic Party wanted to know who burglarized the Watergate Hotel. Question by Robert Whaley to Dave DeWitt: do you have any comments about James Comey or the special prosecutor's appointment by Nixon's White House to get at the bottom of the Watergate hotel crimes?
Well, I'd like to focus first on Comey and what's happening right now. Do I have any comments? Where to begin? Referring to Sawyer and the Clintons allegedly running Arkansas like a banana republic, I think it's pretty obvious that our president right now is trying to run the United States of America like a two-bit banana republic, and he's doing an awful job of it. He can't keep his own lies straight from day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute. What we're seeing right now is one of the most horrifying acts that I've ever seen any president undertake, in my lifetime at least. I wasn't around for Nixon, but so we have let's just take their names out of it. We have the FBI investigating campaign connections between the President of the United States and Russia. We have an Attorney General who lied about his own interactions with Russia, was caught lying, and had to recuse himself.
Sessions?
Jeff Sessions.
Yes, okay.
We have a foreign policy advisor, Jared Kushner, who also lied about his interactions.
A relative of Trump.
And son-in-law of the president, who also lied about his connections with Russia. We have a national security advisor who was forced to resign only a month into the administration's term because he also lied about his connections with Russia.
Go ahead.
We have the FBI investigating the president's campaign about their connections to Russia, and we have that FBI director fired the very same week that subpoenas are issued in that investigation. Moreover, the very next day, the President of the United States hosts the Russian foreign minister in the Oval Office,
Right.
doesn't allow the U.S. press into that meeting, but allows the Russian press into that meeting, and then, apparently, according to the Washington Post in a bombshell article yesterday, divulges highly sensitive national security classified information to the Russian foreign minister. And more than this, he can't even keep his own lies straight for why he fired the FBI director, which is unprecedented. We've only had one other FBI director fired, and that was under the administration of Bill Clinton, and there was ample evidence of wrongdoing on his part. What Donald Trump, what his excuse originally was, first of all, he asked his attorney general to come up with an excuse. And his attorney general, who lied about his own connections to Russia and recused himself from the investigation, therefore violated that recusal by even participating in this conversation. They ginned up this excuse that Donald Trump is actually coming to the defense of Hillary Clinton, of all people, and James Comey's handling of the Clinton situation in the summer and in October of 2016. Donald Trump then gave an interview the next day that directly contradicted that and said that he was going to fire him, Comey, regardless of whatever recommendations the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General came up with. And so we have a situation where the President of the United States is compromising foreign intelligence in important situations in Syria and ISIS. We have just scads of evidence of connections between him, his closest people, and Russia. We have him actively cooperating with Russia. We have him firing the head of the FBI, who's investigating his own connections to Russia, strangely mentioning it in his letter. Frankly, at this point, it's surprising. This is much worse to me than what Nixon did, even. This is the president directly sharing, divulging state secrets with the Russians. What surprises me is that there are any Republicans still carrying water for this guy. But there are. Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan are still carrying water at this point. And it's actually a kind of fun parlor game. What awful revelation will come up next, and which Republicans will continue to be apologists for and defend this administration, which is at best wholly incompetent and at worst actively malicious and borderline treasonous against the United States?
Well, I think you have given us an indictment of what's wrong with Donald Trump. But I think you kind of exaggerate a bit, because the information that Trump has problems with Russia is based on leaks from the Washington Post. The Washington Post only knows what the CIA knows. So who's leaking to the Washington Post these charges? They're not yet proven. That's what the special prosecutor has to do.
Well,
prove them.
I think that there absolutely has to be a special prosecutor.
Okay.
And you know who should want a special prosecutor the most?
All right.
Donald Trump. Because if Donald Trump claims that there are no Russian connections and he's free and clear and he hasn't done anything wrong. Well, if he truly believes that, and if that's truly the case, then he should want an independent investigator to squash this and clear his name entirely. Because if he doesn't have an independent investigator, then no matter what the results of the investigation are, his political enemies are never going to believe it. Yeah. The American people are never going to have faith in an investigation that isn't independent. If Donald Trump truly wants to clear his name, then he should want an independent investigation more than anyone else. His actions, he does not want that. His actions are the actions of, to me, from my perspective, my opinion, are the actions of somebody who's guilty, not the actions of somebody who's innocent and looking for vindication.
Okay. Well, to get back to our differences, you are a journalist and you are always interested in what's going to happen next, because a journalist has to look to the future. But putting myself back in Richard Nixon's day, I, as a historian, knew that Richard Nixon was lying, and I had no faith in Richard Nixon. But Richard Nixon had a majority of the votes. And we had to have the special prosecutor to find out what Richard knew or didn't know, and that's why we have the Saturday Night Massacre. Do you know what the Saturday Night Massacre is?
I do. That's when he fired a bunch of people from the Justice Department.
All right. Well, that had to be voiced by, see, I was convinced, but you had to convince a majority of the Republican Party that Nixon was a crook. Because all Nixon did is say, I'm not a crook. Well, I didn't believe him, no. But we had to have a House Judiciary Committee, which was bipartisan, Democrats and Republicans, vote for an impeachment. And Nixon lost that vote. But it took 2 or 3 years to get that special prosecutor and that vote. And Nixon finally resigned in August of 1974, 74. So Sirica discovered the break-in in 1972. It took them 2 full years to investigate who's lying, who is James McCord, who are the CIA directors, and Nixon was able to postpone that for at least 2 years.
Right.
In order for the
remember, in his case, they never even established that he ordered the Watergate break-in. What they were able to establish and what cost him the impeachment votes was the cover-up, the discovery of the tapes that confirmed that he actively took part in the process of attempting to cover it up.
Well, you know who James Dean is?
Oh, yes, of course I do.
Well, he's been over the tapes, and there have been many, many historians have been over the tapes, and I don't think anybody thinks that it wasn't Richard Nixon who ordered the break-ins.
Oh, no, I agree. I think
that's what historians do, is go over the record and prove it.
Right, and well, you know my thoughts about Nixon. I think that he himself committed treason by sinking the 1968 peace accords in Vietnam.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, that's right.
But
that's true.
But the impeachment, when he lost the votes, when he would have been impeached, when he was forced to resign.
In the Congress, but it's up to the Senate to convict.
And it was the cover-up that lost him those Republican votes. And
That's right.
And I think that you're very right and very astute on one specific point. It will take Republican action at this point to do anything about Donald Trump. They control both the House and the U.S. Senate. And in order for them to act, they're going to have to start to lose political capital and support. Right now, at least the polls from last week, and this might have changed this week, we haven't seen anything recent, but Donald Trump still enjoys 84 to 89% support among Republicans.
That's right.
Now, he doesn't enjoy support among Democrats or independents.
That's right.
But members of the Republican Party still support him. Right. And I really believe... Well, we'll see what these latest actions show and whether he loses support there. But I think you have to see that number really go down before you start to see people like Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan actually step up to the plate and put country before party and do something about this.
Mitch McConnell will change his mind as we get closer to the 2018 election.
And that's the other thing.
And when he sees that the Democrats are going to get 24 new seats, he's going to have to do a little backing off, because the Democrats in places like Ohio and Kentucky and so forth are beginning to ask themselves, why did I vote for Trump? The Republicans are asking themselves, why did I? And that was the importance of my bringing in Cameron Sawyer, because he was a Republican oil
big business conservative.
And he's had direct experience in Russia. And he just changes his mind recently. So I just would like to follow up on what Sawyer was saying. Sawyer admits in October of 2016 that Donald Trump is a repulsive character, utterly unqualified and utterly unsuited to be the office of the President of the United States. According to Robert Whaley, the issue now is the great majority of Congress, Attorney General, has to decide who's going to investigate the FBI and James Comey. Should Congress appoint a special prosecutor? This is up to the majority of a bipartisan joint resolution of Congress and its Congressional Intelligence Committee. The news now reminds everybody of Richard Nixon's last days in the White House. Nixon, when he was firing practically everybody in the White House in 1973, at that time, Congress and the mass media, led by the New York Times and the Washington Post, were investigating Richard Nixon. In addition, the Democratic Party wanted to know who burglarized the Watergate Hotel. So, we now know that James Comey and the prosecutor is going to have to look at the precedent of Richard Nixon's White House in order to get a special prosecutor. Now, here's what Sawyer said. In October 1916, he said, "I can't believe I'm writing this 10 days before the election. But if I were registered to vote, I would have, but I can't because I've been abroad all of this time, and I didn't manage to get it in time. But I might actually hold my nose and take the whole box of anti-nausea drugs and pull the lever for the clown for America would be Caligula." You know who Caligula was?
Caligula, yeah, he was the third Roman emperor.
Yeah.
He only ruled for 3 years before he was killed by the Praetorian Guard.
Yeah.
And he ran a reign of terror. He had himself declared a god. He tortured and killed people. He was an awful, awful person.
Cameron does more than 180 degrees.
Yeah. But so I'm glad that you brought that up, the October surprise with Comey, because I think it's Comey testified that he was faced, the way he put it was he either was going to be transparent and acknowledge to Congress the fact that these new files were discovered on Huma Deem's husband, Anthony Weiner's computer, and that they had to go through these files and look for them to make sure that there wasn't anything new in the Clinton investigation that they had to reopen. Or he could have done that without telling Congress and not throwing the election into chaos 11 days before Election Day. And I understood his reasoning when he talked about that before the Senate, but having gone through that myself, I think it really did make a difference. And I'm not excuse making for Hillary Clinton. I just think that, you know, the FBI had cleared the investigation in July, and we were kind of, as an electorate, able to put that behind us. And then 11 days before the election, to raise the specter of this one more time. And it was just kind of a groaner for it was a groaner for me, because it was
Comey's integrity is questionable.
Well, I think that was a mistake. I think that it did impact the election, and I think the FBI has to be above board and above politics to have the respect of the American people. And when you do influence an election like that, whether intended or not, it undermines the respectability of the FBI, and it legitimately hurt the election. Because it reminded everybody that, oh, yeah, with the Clintons, there does come all this baggage, and there is all this stuff about, you know, are there shady dealings or not? And no matter how you feel about that, you're just reminded of the fact that, oh, that's how things are going to be. And I think it did influence some voters. I mean, I was never the most enthusiastic Clinton supporter anyway. I did vote for her out of a sense of responsibility, the kind of an Alexis de Tocqueville idea that I can't vote for my own feel-goods, I have to vote for...
We both voted for Sanders in the primary.
We did.
But because of the general, we had to vote for Hillary.
Because we're faced with this enormous threat in the form of Donald Trump. Right. And so it was only reasonable that living in a swing state like Ohio, you have to vote. You can't just vote for your own good feelings. You have to vote for, you know, your country, really. And
well, you have to vote on the basis of what the press will reveal about the secret intelligence committees. There were 17 intelligence committees. And
with regard to Russia?
In regard to the whole world.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You know what
yeah.
happened on 11th of September 2001? These Arabs got in a civilian airliners, and they bombed They had three attacks on the Pentagon, on the Trump Towers, the Twin Towers in New York, and then they had a third one that was sabotaged out in Pennsylvania,
Pentagon,
Western Palace.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
how
before.
did a whole American intelligence operation not become aware of who the jihadis are and who the Arabs are? They were so concentrated on Russia, they ignored the problems of the Middle East. And that they got
There was some intelligence on
had
Osama bin Laden, and Bill Clinton warned George W. Bush about
Yeah.
Osama bin Laden, and there were memos before September 11th.
But these are the
But they were not given the credence that obviously
That's
they
right.
should have.
Yeah, right. So there are some people who think that the 2001 burning of the towers was also a plot. The CIA's tower went down, rather strange. The CIA records were destroyed in building the third.
Pentagon?
Yeah, no, but they had two big
Oh,
towers.
and
Then there was a third tower that didn't go down until 5 o'clock in the evening. And it had all of the CIA
Building
records in
7.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
the seventh building. Strange. And then the CIA and the Pentagon went there and picked up every bit of evidence you can't get at the nuclear material, whether it was gasoline or nuclear materials or explosions inside. That whole thing has never been fully explained, in my opinion, until somebody gets at those records. The CIA, the DIA have never, nobody has gotten into the archives. That's the point. Okay, that's the problem. It has to be proven in a court of law that there was either a plot or there was an accident.
Well, a lot of those records won't become available until 50 years after.
Who knows?
So
Who knows?
we're talking
Well, anyway, to get back
2051.
to the Watergate affair then, Chris Matthews spoke about the Saturday Night Massacre on cable TV last week. Now, this sensational story was broadcast on the 9th of May, 2017. Well, unfortunately, I don't think that today's generation can understand what the Saturday Night Massacre means. It's a metaphor. That has to be developed, is what I'm saying as a historian. So now I well remembered that the end of the Nixon administration, when he was actively teaching at Ohio University, and I had voted for George McGovern, senator from South Dakota in 1972, and wanted to bring peace to Indochina as a diplomatic historian. Nevertheless, most Americans were not yet ready for a peaceful foreign policy. Richard Nixon and his national security advisor, Henry Kissinger, were pulling off a disguised retreat from the lost Indo-Chinese wars. Richard Nixon was reelected in November of 1972 with an overwhelming majority of the vote. The Democratic Party was badly divided between the doves and the hawks as to the wisdom of pursuing the several unwinnable wars in Indochina. Nixon won the presidential election because he got 100% of the hawk vote, and he got half of the dove vote because there were many center Democrats, conservative Democrats, who could read between the lines and said, well, the American troops have been pulled out. They had 564,000 troops when Johnson retired. And what this disguised retreat did is that Nixon and Kissinger kept pulling him out month by month and month. So in 72, in November of 72, there were only 20,000 American combat troops left. Mm-hmm. And right after they pulled them, and Nixon was elected, then Kissinger goes to Hanoi and negotiates with Lee Duc-Tho and says a ceasefire. Well, we all know that Henry Kissinger believed in the balance of power. And you were very critical of Henry Kissinger. And I think he's no Democrat. But I think that Henry Kissinger, as a diplomatic historian, understands how the balance of power works. And unfortunately, few Americans understand how Roosevelt won in World War II with the balance of power, and how George Washington won the American Revolution because he understood the balance of power, and Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War understood the balance of power. And Henry Kissinger then said to Nixon, as long as you stay in Vietnam, you are driving Beijing and Moscow together. If you withdraw, then you can play Beijing against Moscow, and we can have then a diplomatic resolution of the nuclear war, and we don't have to go to war. We can do it through diplomacy. Mm-hmm. So I do believe in balance of power diplomacy. Unfortunately, most American Democratic candidates have not had enough history. Now, I think that John Kerry understands the balance of power, but he learned rather late. And he was the advisor for Donald
Secretary of State.
Secretary of State, and he was playing a game. What do we do about Syria? Do we ally with Russia to take care of Syria, or do we ally with Israel and keep the Russians out? Mm-hmm. So there's a tremendous confusion between America's policy with the would-be Islamic states. The Turks, the Saudis,
yeah, you have the Turks and the
Iranians,
Kurds, the Saudis, the Iranians.
There are four potential big powers in the Middle East, but the Saudis don't like the Iranians. The Iranians don't like the Turks.
The Turks don't like the Kurds.
Yeah,
there's all sorts of problems.
Well, how do we find a lie? How does the balance of? How does the new Henry Kissinger understand who the United States should ally with, and who is the major enemy? Is it the jihadi? Is that our major enemy? Maybe Trump is right. We have to ally with Russia because the Russians don't like Islamic people, and the Russians want to join the United States in a war against terrorism because they got their own Muslim terrorists. In Chechnya, there are 20 million Muslims living in the Soviet Union. So maybe Trump is not quite the fool that the Democrats think he is.
Well, I don't think that a strategic, limited military alliance towards certain goals with Russia in Syria is a bad thing.
Okay.
I think that unknown business ties, unknown campaign ties, unknown intelligence sharing, unknown sharing of classified information, and all sorts. I mean, there's so many red flags. There's not just smoke. The whole house is on fire with regard to Trump and Russia.
Okay.
With regard to the Syrian situation, yeah, so it's a balance of, first of all, you have to figure out what is the proper role for the United States. Is it the United States' role to step in
decide.
and deal with the Syrian civil war? How limited should that be or not?
I don't want another war.
You know, and I don't either. And so that's why I'm more of the belief that the United States' role should be fairly limited. I think that our allies in the region should be the Kurds. I think that they've earned our support in a lot of ways. The Kurds do not deserve to be massacred, and we have a moral obligation to make sure that they're not
if you ally
by
with
Turkey
the Kurds,
or ISIS.
If you ally with the Kurds, you alienate the Turks.
Well, we already are allied with both.
Okay, well,
Except for that when we signed our treaty with the Turks,
Okay.
they turned around and bombed the Kurds.
Okay,
So that's a
now-
problem. But
the Turks can ally with Russia. Then what happens to the United States? The Turks don't like Kurds, and they don't like their neighbors, the Syrians.
no, the Turks just want to maintain their borders, mostly. And they want...
I think there is an Ottoman advance.
Do you think that they want to expand?
Well, they can't do it alone, no.
Yeah.
But the Turks they do have the choice of aligning with Russia.
Well, it'll be interesting now that basically the despot has taken over Turkey and
He's a despot.
and
We can't
he's-
believe him.
Yeah, no. Although President Trump called to congratulate him for usurping democracy in Turkey, so that's
Well,
interesting.
that's terrible, from my point of view.
Mine as well.
Yeah, so we have a problem that the balance of power and democracy and imperialism are in total conflict. And I come back to Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger understood the balance of power, but he was not a very good Democrat.
Well, he wasn't a Democrat at all. He was, well, you know, I believe he should be tried for war crimes.
Okay.
But actually, he just met with Donald Trump last week.
That
in
may be
advance of Trump's world tour.
That may be what Trump is playing on, Henry Kissinger.
Yeah, they've been in contact for a little while now, but I'd be
But he's 100
hesitant.
years old. He's not going to be decisive.
Right, and I would be hesitant to believe that Henry Kissinger has any more influence over the whims of Donald Trump than anyone else. Nobody seems to be able to
That's true.
influence him, and he seems to act
He
impulsively.
thinks he's a real estate dealer. And he thinks he knows
matter
more than
what.
all of the intelligence committees, and he knows more than the Secretary of State.
Yeah.
And he is a law unto himself. And the bottom line is a real estate dealer does not have any diplomatic experience. He doesn't have any financial Wall Street experience. He doesn't understand how the oil business works. Now, he's appointed Tillerson as his Secretary of State.
And Tillerson said some really boneheaded things himself.
Right.
And so what I worry about is that the Trump administration is using up American capital
That's right.
at a like political persuasive capital for small d democracy
Right.
across the globe
That's
at
true.
an alarming rate, because he's basically exhausting our credibility.
Right.
When you have the President of the United States doing things like firing the FBI director on a whim when he's under investigation, these are the same types of things that two-bit dictators in third world countries do.
That's the
and
banana
so
republic.
you're exhausting, yeah, you are exhausting our cachet with
Right.
the world when they say they can look at us and say, well, why should we follow these human rights and small d democracy ideals when the United States itself is behaving, you know, like a despot.
Right.
We don't have any credibility left. And he's only, you know,
When you
he's
say
not even
we, you mean
the United States.
You mean the
For the past
you mean-
60 years, everything that we've
okay, all right.
talked about on the world stage as
okay,
our
all
ideals
right.
and our beliefs.
So we have a president, and we have two houses of Congress, and we have a Supreme Court, and we got 60 states. So democracy depends on the voter making the decision of whether they want a Democrat or Republican in office as the president and a senator from each state. So that's why I say the next move is not going to come before 2018. Donald Trump will not be impeached before 2018.
Well, I certainly wouldn't bet on the,
Right.
I wouldn't take the under in that over-under. I wouldn't bet on the Republican Party in Congress to hold him accountable.
Okay, well, they may be forced to, because as
The best hope we have right now is for the judiciary to hold him accountable, and that's what they've done so far. They've stopped certain
Right.
unconstitutional executive orders,
Right.
and they're
he has his own Supreme Court guy, Gorsuch. Now, what will Gorsuch do?
Gorsuch is just another Scalia. I mean, he's basically that hard line, and he's just another, you know, So basically, everything is back to being in the hands of Anthony Kennedy on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, but the Supreme
He's
Court...
the tie-breaking vote still.
Yeah, but the Supreme Court is controlled by corporate plutocrats. There are
Well, at least 4, maybe sometimes 5 of them.
five are plutocrats,
Yeah.
and we have a few liberals there.
Yeah.
There's
4.
one woman, there are 2 women.
3 liberal women: Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Elena Kagan, and Sonia Sotomayor.
Well, Sonia,
And then Stephen
Sonia is somewhat of a centrist.
That's true.
She's a Puerto Rican. She's young. She represents a minority point of view. And she's not going to be the decisive vote in any 5 to 4 decision.
Kennedy is always the decisive
Okay.
vote at this point.
Yeah, that's right.
And he'll continue to be until
Right.
something else happens on
Right.
the court
Right.
at this point, with
Right.
Gorsuch in there.
So that's the problem. The Democrats are too badly divided, and the Republicans are too united at this point. But I predict that over the next 2 or 3 years, the Republican great majority is going to be undermined.
Well, yeah, talk about exhausting political capital. That's what they're doing with each new, circus show incident that the White House brings about. They're going to continue to lose the support of the general public. And as we get closer to 2018, as you astutely pointed out earlier, they're going to get more and more protective of their own political prospects in the future as a result of that.
All right, so let's get to the point here. Do you want to say anything about the failed McGovern campaign in 1972 and how it was that McGovern got the nomination but had the biggest loss in the general election? Why were the Democrats so badly divided?
Well, remember that was the year where there was the big change in the primary process.
That's right.
For the Democrats. And so I think that's a big reason why he got the nomination over Muskie and McCarthy. Was that the other one?
No, there were 6 candidates.
Yeah, there were a bunch, but at the top it was McGovern, Muskie.
There were 5. There was Wallace. Wallace was number 1.
George Wallace.
Wallace was number 1 when it began. Now, what happened to Wallace? How did he get out? What happened?
Well, he got shot in 68, but we're talking about 72, right?
Okay, Wallace ran twice.
Yeah.
Once in 68 and once in 72. Now, in 68, he ran as an independent and was shot and badly wounded.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1972, he ran as a Democrat. He changed his party identification.
Right. He was still trying to play up the old Dixiecrat.
Well, somebody got to Wallace and said, well, maybe it was Richard Nixon who shot you. And he began to believe that. And he spoke to his Democratic followers in Alabama. Okay, I've been wrong on racism. I want you to vote for Wallace in 1972. So he made a kind of a Democratic recovery, and he appointed a black as his assistant. And he got a lot of black votes in 72.
Yeah.
Strange, wasn't
Well,
it?
yeah. Well, but to answer your question, why did McGovern win? I think, well, first of all, I want to say, if I have anything to say about it, I regret that I wasn't alive to vote for George McGovern because he's one of the more honorable politicians that I've studied in American history. But the reason why I think he got the nomination was, first of all, because he was honest and honorable, and because he was a peace candidate. I mean, he was an outright peace candidate, and therefore he was able to motivate a large group of progressive and young voters.
Right.
But it didn't translate into the general election, partially because of what Nixon famously called the silent majority, but also because McGovern had some hiccups himself, like the Thomas Eagleton affair, with the revelations that his vice presidential nominee
that is inside the Democratic Party.
had been to a mental institution and that stuff. So there were some self-inflicted wounds there.
Well, the Democratic Party is badly divided. Now, the Republicans were united on anti-communism. But what McGovern and Eugene McCarthy and Senator Fulbright and Senator Mansfield, the so-called Dubs, were saying that anti-communism is an ideology and you have to decide the issues on balance of power. Fulbright understood the balance of power. He was in chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. And Fulbright said, well, the biggest problem is the Middle East. And the Israelis disliked Fulbright. They did as much as they could to sabotage Fulbright. And he came from the safe state of Arkansas. They couldn't touch him, right? Now, Fulbright was not particularly concerned with the Soviet Union until Nixon, no, it was John Kennedy. It was
Teddy?
Bush. The Democrat, LBJ.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
LBJ, by expanding that war in Indochina, alienated Fulbright from Arkansas, Mansfield from Montana, Wayne Morse from Oregon. So there were 17 Dubs, but they were a minority. The majority was still anti-communist. Okay?
Right.
And McGovern was a veteran of World War II. He was a bomber pilot. Yet the Veterans of Foreign War endorsed Nixon and didn't believe that George McGovern had experience as a pilot and was a war hero. So the VFW didn't even back their law. They went for Nixon above common sense of what do you do about the veterans.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, you had Wallace, Muskie. Now, why did Muskie drop out? Do you know why Muskie dropped out?
Why did Muskie drop out?
He was from Maine. He was Maine.
Oh, I remember Ed Muskie, but the only thing that ever comes to mind about him is the Hunter Thompson stuff from
Okay, well, I'll tell you
Fear and
about Ed
Loathing on the
Muskie.
Campaign Trail.
I lived in Maine.
Yeah.
I voted for Muskie for senator. Now, Ed Muskie was first of all Polish, and his real name was Muskiewicz. But he changed his name to Muskie because Muskie was a fish.
Oh,
Yeah, this is the way you get votes. And Muskie's stand on the war was, we can't discuss communism and the Vietnam War. It's too controversial. And he made environment the #1 issue. And he passed the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Solid Waste Disposal. And Nixon signed the Muskie bills.
Yeah, I remember.
And then the media give Nixon the credit.
Right.
Oh, well, Nixon was great on the environment. All he did was to endorse Muskie.
Yeah.
Well, the reason why Muskie dropped out, he dropped out in May of '72. Okay? And supposedly, he dropped out because of the Manchester Union Leader, which was the most reactionary right-wing paper in New Hampshire and the whole United States. And that always tilted the New Hampshire primary in favor of the Republicans. So, Muskie was told, this Manchester Union said that he had tears in his eye, and he was too sensitive.
Yeah.
Because somebody called his wife a Canuck, which is a slang word that's only good in New Hampshire and Maine. The people in Ohio never heard of a Canuck.
Yeah.
But anyway, in New Hampshire, Maine, a Canuck is a slur word for French Canadians.
Right.
Okay.
I forgot. Yeah, it was the crying thing.
So then the Manchester said, well, he's too sensitive. He can't put his finger on the nuclear. He should drop out. Well, Muskie then had some problems with being the Catholic candidate, because how is the Catholic vote going to go?
Right.
Muskie was trying to win on the basis of the Catholic vote. But after this New Hampshire incident, he said, well, I can't win. So for the good of the party, I will not run. And he decides to resign suddenly in May. And the Ohio party was totally baffled. Okay, we got 2 minutes to go. Well, anyway, we're going to stop at an inconclusive point. And I'm just going to summarize by saying that McGovern got the nomination because Muskie and the other four kept chopping each other up.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't endorse him in the final round. And that included Eagleson. Well,
and I want to say, since I have about maybe 30 seconds left, as long as we're on 72, I still think that Hunter Thompson's Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72 is one of the best accounts of that election.
Oh, he's a historian?
Frank Mankiewicz, who was McGovern's press secretary, campaign manager, called it the least factual but most accurate account of that campaign. It's Hunter Thompson, the journalist.
Hunter Thompson's a journalist. I have never read the book.
Well, I would highly recommend it. Maybe I'll bring you a copy next time.
Well, no, you can summarize it.
Okay.
You can tell me what Hunter Thompson said.
Okay.
But I ignored it at the time.
Summarize.
And I haven't had the experience to reread it.
Yeah.
Of course, Mankiewicz is another media man. So it's one pundit supporting another pundit.
Yeah. Well, he was McGovern's campaign manager,
Yeah,
but we'll get to that another time.
Okay. Well, anyway, oxygen is a debate of democracy. And unfortunately, we'll have to continue next week.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor.